most important part of ministry. Yes, our skills as musicians or as administrators, all those things count, but relationships are so very important in building the family of God. That's just, I guess I'm just going to make that assumption that we know that and we try to practice that. We know God's relationship with us is so important, and his invitation for us to have a relationship with him through Jesus Christ and through the working of the Spirit. But also that we have relationships with one another, modeling the interworking of the triune God and helping one another grow in Christ. That is part and parcel of what it means to belong to the family of God, growing in maturity individually, and through that also helping to grow the participants, those who come into the kingdom of God through God working through us in these growing processes and in through our relationships. So we know all that. Last time on the webinar, we focused on the why reasons of mentoring. We touched on a few of those key reasons. Why do we spend the time? Why do we spend the energy investing ourselves in others? How do we defend that? Maybe even when people in our congregation say to us, hey, we pay you to do all of that. Why are you teaching and training other people to do that? And we came up with a few reasons. Here's just a little recap from last time. We said that there's an ecclesiastical reason. I'm just going to put it really boldly today. I'm going to say it this way. We are the church only in so much as we are the church together. You can think on that later, but that's how I feel so strongly about the interconnectivity of those who are in the body of Christ. We also said one of the reasons we do mentoring, intentional relationship, is that it's necessary for us to grow up in the faith. I think the Bible puts it this way: iron sharpens iron. We enter into one another's lives in that way. Another reason, mentoring provides opportunity for diversity to come into our ministry area. If we're doing everything ourselves, we have a narrow slice of what could be the worship experience of the people of our congregation. Whereas if we are intentionally bringing other people into the work, we are reaching out for other personalities, other styles, other talents, and diversifying what we have. And I think St. Paul's has a lot to say about the beauty of diversity in the life of the church practiced in unity. And then we spent most of our time exploring a harsh reality that we are all replaceable. Maybe those of you who were with us last time will remember this paragraph. I'm just going to read this to remind us. This is from Dr. Ryan Lockismo's book, Paul and His Team. At some point, whatever influence we have will be handed off to someone else. Someone will take over for us in whatever leadership role we currently occupy. If there is no one waiting for the baton, we risk squandering our influence. If there is someone waiting, but they do not begin running before we arrive to pass them the baton, then they are not adequately prepared for the race they're about to run. We have to make sure that there are people waiting to run the next leg of the race, and we have to make sure that they are already running before we hand them the baton. Yeah, those words inspiring us to say, okay, this is not just about me and my job and my role, but it is about passing on that which was passed on to me. We mentor, therefore, for the sake of the church, for the love of growing up in the image of Jesus Christ, and for the hope and assurance that God has a plan, and God is going to work through others when we are no longer in our ministry, or perhaps even no longer on this earth. Today, I'm going to take us back to a section from the first webinar that we sort of skimmed over. I'm going to talk more about some practical ideas, including just some parameters of what the key characteristics of worship mentoring might look like. This is some ways in which we differentiate mentoring from other relationships that we have with people. So here's just a few. First of all, mentoring is typically mentee driven. Most of the research that I've done says that's the key component, that the mentee is the one driving the relationship and the need there. Now, that's interesting, because I'd also say that the very best mentoring relationships have two, maybe three or four, but at least two very active and engaged participants. Then I'm going to say this, that once that's happening, a mature mentoring relationship will become mentee-driven. The mentee will recognize needs in themselves. They will start to see a sense of hope for something else, a drive towards something. And they'll recognize that the mentor has something to offer them. And then the mentee will reach into the mentor's life and ask for that help. Now, notice I said that's a mature relationship, but sometimes it takes us a bit to get there. So I do believe that there may be times in initiating relationships when a mentor steps in and does say, I'm available. Would you like to start a relationship? If we waited only for mentees to suggest the idea, then I'm in a family where there's a lot of shy people, and I know for a fact that those folks, even if they wanted some help, aren't quite sure. They don't really want to say, hey, can I bother you? They feel uncomfortable with that. They would need someone else to start the relationship, and then they might dive into it. So one of the characteristics eventually should be mentee-driven. Secondly, this relationship is a regularly scheduled event, not a sporadic thing. It's something that happens scheduled on a time that they both agree to, and it's not just, hey, let's get together. That's a key factor that differentiates mentoring from other relationships. It's intentional. We are getting together to accomplish X. We're going to meet at church and sit at the piano to learn about chord changing in the middle of a song. There's an intentionality to what we are choosing to do in the relationship. Even in our conversations, we're going to have a conversation so that we can focus on, and then some parameters around that, some intentionality. That makes it a little different than just, let's have lunch. Okay, and now two others. One is reflective. A mentoring relationship invites reflective conversation. Yes, the conversations are intentional, but they're also introspective. And so in order to accomplish that, mentors need to learn the art of question asking, the kind of questions that help people open up their hearts, open up their minds. And mentees need to develop a sense of, well, but they both do need to develop a sense of trust with one another so that this reflection can happen. Maybe someday it would be great to do a webinar even on what does it look like to have theological reflection about our worship practices. How does that impact us? How does theology or bibliology, how does that impact what we do? Those are some of the questions that mentors would ask and mentees would be focusing on. And just a fifth characteristic of mentoring relationships vis-a-vis other friendships is that it is also reflexive. So a little different there. By this I mean that both parties are engaging with one another. There's a difference between the roles of mentor and mentee, but the mentor does also participate in sharing their life story to the extent that it is helpful and supportive to the mentee. Let me just, as an example, we've had a really rough week at our school here in Denver, Colorado. Last week, Friday, one of the students died by suicide. And it's really shaken our community, as you can imagine. And so there's been a change in how school happens. There's been less instruction in the classroom and more conversations. In fact, one of the days the principal just said there will be no instruction. You're just here to talk with one another and share stories and be together. One of my daughter's teachers, her engineering physics teacher, a very quiet and shy man, took the time to share the grief story of his own divorce and say to the kids, I thought there was no one for me during that time. I looked around and wasn't sure if anyone would support me. It was awful, it was dark, it was hard. But I realized as I went through it that people came out of the woodwork when I asked for help and supported me. This had such an impression on my daughter that someone who's a teacher, a mentor, someone who she looks up to would take the time to say that they also had experienced hurt and pain. So reflexive means that the mentor isn't just aloof and separate, but takes time to share appropriate life story that helps the mentee. All right, so that makes the different relationship between a mentor and mentee versus friends or boss and employee. Those are different relationships. So now we're going to look a bit at the roles that we started doing last time. Now, so where are we here? Remember, last time we started talking about a number of different roles that mentors have. And I asked you to share below some of the titles, some of the descriptors, adjectives that you might use instead of using the word mentor. And we came up with a list that looks something like this: tutor, coach, teacher, pastor, discipler, counselor, sponsor, hero, model. And if you remember from last time, I had a slide that had an umbrella, and then these words were below the word mentor. So mentor was the broad title, and these descriptor words were underneath. Some of these words come from the book Connections, written by Robert Clinton and Paul Stanley, and some of them are descriptors I've picked up along the way here. These are modes of mentoring. We also talked about how important it is to define these terms when we're mentoring, because people have such presumptions about the words, especially even about this word mentoring. So for instance, if somebody asks me to mentor them, I want to know what they're really asking me to do and be in their life. Is there a skill or knowledge that they want me to share with them? Do they have some personal questions or struggles or spiritual concerns that they want to process? They want to do the talking and just have me listen and process this with them. Are these people looking for encouragement? Are they maybe even looking for me to introduce them to people I know or to resources that I have? So each of those things would be very different. And if I don't ask the question and find out what they're after, we could be at odds with one another. So I think it's important to untangle these roles that we had last time. And that's where we're going back to. If you were with us last time, we're going to go back to that category of understanding what these different roles are underneath the main heading of mentoring. But before we untangle, I need to give you a couple warnings, all right? So warning number one, these modes of mentoring cannot be completely untangled. So I'm going to try, I'm going to separate them. But if it feels artificial to you in kind of making them each their own thing, I agree with you. I don't think that these things, these categories can sit completely separate from one another. They're going to overlap in many ways. So why try to separate them? I think if we can pull them apart and look at each one individually before putting them back together under the category of mentoring, if they're apart, it helps each one of us see them clearly and maybe even encourage us and make us say, oh, I already do that. Or, oh, I'm pretty skilled at that thing. I never thought of that as mentoring before. Or perhaps even this one. Oh, I could really use a mentor in that category. I'd never thought of that as a mentoring relationship before. So that's my purpose in untangling them, but I'm honest here. You really can't just separate them completely, okay? Warning number two, the descriptions and, quote, definitions that I'm going to give you are from the research I've done and from my own words. I've collected these, I've reworded them to fit my own understanding, but these are not universal definitions. In fact, the business world versus some of the Christian world, the ministry world in this concept of mentoring do speak somewhat different languages. In the business world, for instance, the word coach is set totally apart from the word mentor. And some of the research I've seen shows that there's this they want to draw a really strict line in the business world between those two roles. Whereas in this conversation here, I'm talking about mentoring as a broad category and coaching being one of the subsets. All right. I still think it's a good thing for us to define terms. And what I'm trying to do here is model for you what it means to define terms, but you have to define terms in your own context. And the wonderful thing about that is this will drive you then to have conversations with the people around you and hear them and understand them. Okay, warning number 3, last warning here. We might be able to do each and every one of these particular mentoring roles. You might be gifted in all these areas, but we never do all of these roles all at the same time with one individual. That's just not healthy, is it? So it is important for us to recognize, if we're in the role of mentor, that we are one of many influencers in the life of other people. We're part of a tribe, if you want to put it in that language. And at the same time, when we are in the role of mentee, we should also be aware that there are a number of people in our life contributing to our growth and helping us move forward, not just one person accomplishing all of these roles. All right, I'm going to ask you to look at it this way. And now I've got to step out here and bring my little visual aid into play. There we go. Thanks to my daughter for allowing me to use her Lego Ferris wheel for this illustration. And bring that a little forward. How's that? All right, we're going to think of our life as a Ferris wheel. I just sitting here watching the wheels go round and round. Some of you are old enough to name that tune. So our life moves around and round. But in the cars of our Ferris wheel sit various people who influence and contribute to our lives. Some of them get on and ride for a while and get off. Some of them stay on the Ferris wheel for a long, long time. So for instance, we might have somebody get on the Ferris wheel who's a friend. Oh, no, here's my friend. Look at this friend. She's bringing ice cream into my life. That's a great friend. Let's stick her up here and put friend. I don't know if you'll be able to read it, but there we go. And then there's family members. This one, oops, excuse me a moment. This character here looks like a runner. My sister is a marathon runner, so I chose her. There's a family member. And maybe there's a neighbor. This guy happened to look like the guy down the street, so here we go. People who are in our lives and contribute to our lives, right? Okay. Now we're going to think about these kinds of things in terms of mentoring, that people play different mentoring roles in our life, okay? But also think not only of ourselves, but let's pretend we are the mentor and someone else is the Ferris wheel. Remember now, we play one of these roles. We don't play all of those roles in someone's life. We're going to get now to those roles. What are they? First of all, I'm going to start with the role of teacher. And we talked about this last time a bit. This may be one of the easiest ones to understand, mentor, and even the example I gave you of my daughter's teacher playing kind of a mentoring role in her life. And let's see, for the mentor role, C3PO, there he is. He goes in there. Okay. I Googled the definition of teacher, and I got this answer. Noun, a person who teaches. Yeah, this is why Google is not always helpful. Here's a better definition. A teacher is a person who helps others acquire knowledge, competencies, or values. Isn't that some of what we're talking about with mentoring? That in a mentoring relationship, a teacher, a mentor wants to help someone and the student wants to achieve knowing more things, being more skilled, or grabbing onto some values, starting a mentoring relationship that is teaching in nature might sound something like this. Now, these are different words. I'm just going to put kind of bold words out there. If the mentor is the one starting the relationship, it might sound something like this. I know something you don't know, said, of course, very humbly and nicely. I know something you don't know. I want you to know it. Please learn from me. And please pack around that concept, much nicer words, humble words. A mentee might start this relationship, a teaching relationship, something like this. You know something I don't know. I'd like to know that. Would you please teach me? Okay, that would be a knowledge-based teaching relationship. You could get the same thing as a teacher. You could get that under a skill-based relationship. Hey, I can do something you can't do, and I really want you to be able to do it. Please practice this skill with me. Or if the mentee, you can do something I can't do, and I really need or want to be able to do this. Please show me. I've had this relationship a number of times, and to be honest, that the start of whether the mentor starts it or the mentee starts it can be really kind of combined. A friend who says to me, I'm watching you change keys and you just do it as though it's second nature. What's happening? What's happening in the chord structures of the songs as you do that? I just can't do that. And then for me to come back and go, yeah, but I couldn't do that a little while ago and someone taught me. Let me teach you. And that person coming back and saying, yeah, I really do want to learn that. Please teach me. So learning that together. So I became her teacher, mentor in that role. One of the ways I paid for seminary was to teach piano lessons. Made up some simple business cards, and I put out the word that I was a piano teacher. I let people know this thing. I can do something that your kids probably can't do yet, and I'd love to teach them how to do it, right? Not in so many words again, but that was the kind of the intent behind my promotion of okay, I'm a piano teacher now. I was actually putting myself out and inviting myself into their lives as a mentor or teacher. At the very same time, my students, or more often it was their parents, to be honest, they would schedule time with me with this mindset. You know something that we want to know or we want our kids to know, please teach them. Now, teaching can sound like a very formal kind of mentoring, but we all know that it doesn't have to be that way. Skills and knowledge can be passed on in very informal relationships, maybe even over very short mentoring relationship times. But this is a distinct and kind of a beautiful role of mentoring in people's lives. How does information, how does doctrine and theology and knowledge of Christ and knowledge of music and worship, how do all those things get passed on? Well, they are taught to us. Someone taught us, and now we teach others. That's mentoring, that's teaching. So in so much as you are a teacher to those who serve with you, this is one of your mentoring roles. Maybe it's not a long-term relationship. It could just be a couple weeks, but it is kind of formalized and intentional and introspective enough for people to say, yeah, this is a growth area I need. Please help me in it. All right, so here we go on the next one. That is teaching. How about another role? And I chose this one to go right near it because it's very similar to it. The category is coaching. And again, in the business world, coaching has its own unique meaning. And frankly, not everyone agrees. What's the difference between coaching and counseling and teaching? So define terms, right? For our purposes, I want to think of a coach as a person who inspires and motivates and who is able to take a big picture and tear it apart and write down what are the steps to get there. I'm watching March Madness. I'm watching these coaches gather their team around and take the board and write out what's that next play with 0.6 of a second left, and you're going to get the ball inbounded. What are you going to do next? Coaches know how to tear things apart and then put them back together with someone. Again, this doesn't have to be a long-term thing. Maybe there's just a very simple skill that someone needs encouragement in and motivation to do it. Coaching alongside of teaching work together here. All right. I also think that a coach is someone who asks really good questions, inviting the mentee to do their own reflecting and observation. So if I were to sort of, parse apart teaching and coaching, which I think is hard to do, teaching might be more focused on the mentor to mentee. In some ways, this webinar feels like that. It like Diane said to me last time, this is hard. I'm in my basement all alone, staring at a tiny little camera and just pouring out information that I've studied. I much prefer when there's interaction in the room. Would get to see your faces and your postures, and you'd be able to ask questions and add your own stories and observations to what we're talking about. That I see starting to lean more into a coaching relationship. So how would a coaching relationship possibly start? Here's the mentor-driven initiative. I see great potential in you. Please accept my suggestions and encouragement for the next steps of your life. Now, remember, I'm not asking you to use those words. That's the undergirding, that's the skeleton, the foundation, the purpose of what you're trying to say. You put your own beautiful words around it. Here's what a mentee boldly might say to initiate a coaching relationship. I'm fascinated. You seem to see something in me that isn't yet clear to me. I'm inspired by you. Please motivate me and help me see what you see. Now, my daughter is kind of coming up a few times here in this webinar, but this happened with her a couple weeks ago. She said to me, Mom, I feel like I need to talk to my AP English teacher. I'm like, oh, okay. She said, I'm not worried about my grade. I mean, it's not the best, but I'm happy with it. But I'm actually I don't get it. I'm getting better grades on my essays than I expect to. I want to know what it is she sees in my writing, because I'm worried that I'm just lucky and that when it comes to writing the AP exam, I'm going to run out of luck. So this introverted, quiet daughter of mine went to her teacher to ask her that question. What is it that you're seeing in me that needs more encouragement? I don't quite get it yet. I don't see it. I'm just feeling a little lucky with my grade. Can you help me identify what that thing is? And will you keep pushing me forward and encouraging me so that I get better and better in the future? I thought it was a pretty brave thing of her to do. Now, remember that I had the privilege of interviewing a number of worship leaders on this whole topic of mentoring. And I want to bring some of their stories into this as well. There's just so many great things that people are doing out there. And so, again, I ask you, if you've got stories about mentoring relationships, what's worked for you, maybe even what hasn't worked, and we can change the names to protect the innocent. We'd love to hear from you. How is mentoring in all of its forms affecting your ministry? So this is a story from Bruce Benedict. He's the chaplain of worship and arts at Hope College. He describes his role in somewhat coaching terms. He said this: I'm so fortunate to already have well-trained musicians audition to be part of our worship bands. So in other words, he sort of jumps over that teaching role. He doesn't have to teach the pianist anything or the guitarist anything. These are the cream of the cream college students who are very talented already. So the need is not instruction, but it is coordination of a team, bringing them to work together, and mentoring them in a way that inspires them and motivates them. He also talked about the ways in which he sort of tears apart some of what they do as worship people in order to put it back together by the end of the year. Talking about doctrine and what it means to be a worship leader, scripture, and helping these young people learn those individual skills as they put them together into the broader category of being worship leaders. So thanks to Bruce Benedict for a wonderful conversation about what it means to be a mentor. And I just see him also doing this coaching category. All right, next category, next mode of mentoring, I'm going to call discipling or pastoring. Ooh, we're having a crash over here at our Ferris wheel. Discipler. In this classic book that I've referred to several times, the book called Connections, written by, I haven't put my people in here. Sorry about that. Interrupt myself a moment here. Here's our discipler, the one who is pointing to the light. How's that? Great. Thanks to my daughter also for allowing me. Oh, Gandalf is already in that. She's going to join Gandalf. How's that? We got Gandalf and Star Wars characters. So thanks, Mia, for letting us use all your characters here in our little example. And who was the coach? There we go. Chewbacca gets to be the coach. All right. We gotta keep this going here. All right, that classic book, Connections, the one I've referred to several times, written by Stanley and Clinton. Those gentlemen both worked in the areas, many years, they both worked in the area of Christian leadership, researching what it means to be a Christian leader and then coaching, mentoring, teaching others in that area. Paul Stanley was with the Navigators for many years, and Robert Clinton was at Fuller Seminary. So in their book, they spend a lot of time talking about the spiritual development of leaders. The terms that they use, spiritual counselor, disciple, spiritual guide, these are not common terms that we hear in our Reformed circles, if I may say so. We do talk about pastors, but we tend to restrict that title to those who are ordained men and women in the role of also preacher or leader of the church. We package those things all together. I would suggest that we are in need, in our context, we are in need of better language that helps us talk about this role of mentoring in a spiritual capacity. What does it look like for our elders, our worship leaders, our families to mentor one another? We've begun to start using these words about faith formation. So how does that impact us? What is that person who leads in the faith formation of others? But for now, I'm going to keep it simple and go with discipler, which if you type it in, will tell you it's misspelled, so it's not the best word. But I'm even going to use the word pastor. If you can broaden your mind and think beyond just the office of the pastor and think of the role of someone who helps another person grow in their spiritual life. The discipler, the pastor, is someone who's alert to spiritual questions and thoughts. They guide conversations with their questions to focus on the Word of God, theological reflection, the questions of the mentee, the direction in which God is leading that mentee to grow. This kind of mentoring relationship might be initiated by a mentor who sees someone with a seed of spiritual maturity, and they just want to grow that. They want to pour water and nutrients into that seed so that it can blossom and grow. Or it might be initiated by a mentee who sees in the mentor, wow, I see spiritual growth in you. How did you get that? Where did that come from? How do you trust in God so much when you're going through such hard times? Can you talk to me about that? Can you help me learn that as well? I interviewed Christy Olson, who is the worship pastor at Craigmore CRC down in Colorado Springs, here in Colorado. He articulated the need for this more in our churches as well. He said this: lay leaders don't think enough about the spirituality of our role as mentors and leaders in our churches. I think he's right. I think it seems like we talk about skills and schedules and songs and service planning, but we don't have enough Jesus talk on our lips. We don't initiate it enough. And I'd love to be wrong about this, but this is my experience as I listen. We tend to kind of stay away from that area and hope that in our teaching and in our coaching, that the spiritual area of growth in people who are around us, that it is simply being caught by them. But we have to do better than just hope it's being caught. We have to be more intentional. That's what mentoring is, right? And in so much as we're not intentional about spiritual growth of those who are around us, those who are in the same ministry as us, in so much as we're not doing that, we're not mentoring them. We're just hoping it happens. All right, I'm going to quickly go through this one because this one isn't one that I am going to recommend to us. Oh, stickies that fall off here. Counselor. R2D2, counselor. This is a specific role that is in the books about mentoring as well. I'm going to just say this, lots of warnings. Don't call your mentoring relationship counseling. I'm counseling with someone. Unless you truly are a trained counselor. And then also be cautious not to let conversations get into the realm of counseling unless you're trained to do that. It's one of the warnings pastors are given. One session of counseling and then referral. This is an area of expertise that not all of us are trained to do. However, I was talking to a trained counselor last week and about some of the sadness going around with all the teenagers in our city, in our area here. He did say, in addition to the work of counselors, one of the things that, one of the skills that counselors have in common with friends is the ability to listen. So in so much as we are good friends, that could be the extent of our counseling, our ability to listen well. So I'm not going to give an example for that one because I want us to be aware that that area of relationship exists, but we should be wary of it. We should be careful of stepping into that ground too much. Okay. Another one I'm going to go by quickly here, but I think it's worthwhile looking at is the area of a hero. This is the mode of mentoring called a hero. Oh yeah, there we go. Put him in here. Heroes. What does this mean? A hero, maybe some of us are not comfortable with being a mentor who's called a hero. We'd rather the term model. All right, that's a good term too. Let's think of these in two ways. Historic models or heroes, and then contemporary ones. Many of us can look back in the history of the church, maybe biblical heroes, people who did things that we're just so thankful for and we see their life story. Or over the years, for instance, I think of Johanna Veenstra and the way in which she's a hero to my life, or Corrie ten Boom, or Hudson Taylor. And we read their stories and we're inspired by them. In a contemporary setting, though, it's fair to notice that some people might be looking at you as their hero. I remember being in a worship band and we were traveling in Estonia and then in Moscow in what is now Russia. And we were being led by a young man. He was probably just a year younger than me at the time. We were all young back then. And he was amazing. He was an incredible pianist. His name was Craig Curry. And he had just started to begin a career as a songwriter, a choral arranger, and writer of piano music. He's now got many, many books out, and I try my best to play them. I would hang around the piano while he was practicing between our rehearsals and then our performances. And, oh, man, I would just, worship the way he played, all right? I just thought he was amazing. So finally I said to him, he's my hero. He's my model. I said to him, oh, Craig, I just wish I could play like you. And this is what my hero said to me. He said, maybe if you spent as much time with your bum on the bench as I do, you could play like I do. All right, that was years ago. And that phrase, bum on the bench, spoken by my hero, has driven me. And I've been able to use that. I take that as kind of a mentoring thing. I went home from that trip, and yes, I spent a lot more time with my bum on the bench. We need to know that there are people around us looking at us, watching us. They may think of us as models for their life, either in our skills or in our character, in our spiritual growth, and they want to model their life after ours. As Paul says to us, I pass on to you what I learned from Christ. I don't think Paul meant just knowledge. I think he meant the character and person of Jesus Christ as well. That needs to make us take a deep breath and say, okay, so what am I doing to encourage others and lead them rightly? Last category, and then I want your questions, please, in conversation. This one is the category of sponsor. And I do need to take a minute here because I think this is the weirdest category, maybe one we're not quite as aware of. And I do believe that this category will likely need to be more mentor-driven than mentee-driven. Also, the work of a sponsor might happen a lot behind the scenes. I see a sponsor as someone who paves the road forward for someone else, for the mentee. And a sponsor is someone who introduces their mentee to other people, opportunities, and resources. In the business world, they say that the sponsor is someone who offers career guidance and helps them get on the right path for the best career, maybe introduces them for job interviews and such. But let's think back to our context, church ministry. Sponsoring might be just as simple for us as advocating for a person to sing a solo in church, to be put on the slate for deacons, to take a new position of leadership. Maybe they're the person who could be the next worship planner or join the worship team or lead a committee at church because you have seen something in them and now you advocate for them. I think our churches need way more sponsors. We need for pastors and leaders in the church to look intentionally for people and say to them, hey, have you ever thought about going to seminary? Hey, have you ever thought about getting a music degree and becoming a worship planner or applying for the worship apprentice program when you go to college? We need to get that kind of thinking going. And then on the other side, also being the advocate when they apply and being willing to write those letters that encourage them. Tony Haas is the worship leader for Most Precious Blood Catholic Church here in Denver. He's a very good friend of mine. And so I asked him about how he got into the work of worship leader. He told me, yes, I have a lot of musical skills and I had theological education, but he said it took an intentional push from a priest who knew the system to get me into this work. This leader named me for roles on committees and he invited me to come to conferences. He is the reason I am in ministry now. He simply said many times, I need to introduce you to a guy, or here's a resource, or you need to go there. And now I try to pass that on. So, and another person that has been an inspiration to me in this role of sponsoring is Brandon Washington. Reverend Brandon Washington is a friend of mine from Denver Seminary, and he's also the author of a recent fantastic article in Christianity Today. It's titled Black and Evangelical, Why I Keep the Label. So you can Google that. It's a great article. And Brandon said to me, in the Black church, you cannot go to seminary until you have already learned to preach. What? That seemed totally backwards to me. That's not how I expected it. When I went to seminary, I learned how to preach at seminary. They didn't expect me to know how to do that. He said, but that's different for the African American experience. See, they weren't allowed to go to the white seminaries. And so because of that, the Black church had to take on the role of mentoring, teaching, training, coaching, sponsoring young people into the roles of ministry so that the church could continue. They had to disciple these people. And so even after African Americans finally got allowed to come into the seminaries, the cultural practice of the church still remains. And one of those cultural practices is that they coach, teach, mentor these young people to learn to preach before they send them off. A key component of all of this is this sponsoring relationship between the senior pastor and the young men who are being mentored. In fact, Brandon told me these young men are referred to as the pastor's sons in ministry. They are my sons, is what a pastor will talk about. The young men follow the pastor around. They carry his umbrella. They drive him places. They are constantly with him. And in return for that allegiance and in part of that relationship, the senior pastor extends his goodwill to them as their sponsor. When it's time for them to take a role in a church, it's the senior pastor who says, yes, they're ready for this. When they do apply for a seminary program, it's the senior pastor's voice who says, yes, I endorse this person forward. Now, Brandon noted, this system is rapidly changing in the Black church, but it's an illustration of how this important role of sponsorship can be played out in not just the Black church, but with us as well, this endorsing of others and saying, go forward. I say, and I add my voice to those who are saying, go and serve the Lord well. Sponsoring, and actually many of these roles remind me of hospitality. Neil Plantinga is famous for this definition of hospitality. Hospitality means to make room for others and to help them thrive in the room you make for them. To make room for others and then to help them thrive. Do you see with me how hospitality is such a big part of what it means to mentor others, whether we are teachers or coaches or disciplers or sponsors or heroes, whatever role it is? Do you see how we are in this privileged position to open up space, to make room for others, and then to do all in our power to help others flourish in that way? I hope God will help us to continue to do that. So Diane, I'm ready to take some questions. I realize I've only left 10 minutes, so I've got some good ones, and I'll keep talking as fast as I can.
Okay, well, we don't have any questions yet, Joy, so I will just do a couple of things here and mention a few things, and then if we don't get any questions, because it was really a great presentation, I'm going to give you time to wrap it up in a few minutes.
Okay.
But definitely type in your comments or questions in the chat box if you're with us live here. Also, Joy, I would just like to say that you have really expanded my view in this webinar, especially of what mentoring is with those roles. And I really appreciate those practical examples that you gave. They really brought it to life for me, especially in the role of church and worship leading and things like that. Even going back to the beginning, you really struck me with that comment of who am I passing the baton to? You know, if I was running this race and I have got this baton in my hand, is there anybody that I'm preparing to hand the baton to? That is a good question for all of us in the church, because sometimes we get so busy doing what we do, we just don't have time to think, you know, about who's going to do this when I get done, or who's doing it alongside of me. Sometimes when we're short of time, it's easier to do it ourselves, you know, and I know you've been there. I didn't give Joy a very good introduction today, but she is a pastor, obviously, a musician, a preacher, and a mentor. So yeah, just thank you so much, Joy. Also, I will say that that we will post, when we post this recording, we will also post a list of resources, and we'll include, again, the book that Joy was talking about, Connections, and how you can find that, and some other resources as well as we will post a list of these people that Joy has connected with to get some of these stories about mentoring. And we'll also include her email address in case you would like to send her your story about mentoring, so that she can continue to gather those and we can all learn from them. So our website at Worship Ministries, again, if you haven't looked, and this is where we will be posting this, this webinar, is simply crcna.org/worship. So it's crcna.org/worship. You'll find all of our resources and our listings and our webinars there. And our email address, if you want to email us, is another simple one, but this time you start with worship. So it's worship@crcna.org. I do want to quick invite you before I turn it back to Joy, and I'm not seeing your questions, so if you have them, type them in. Really, Joy would love to answer anything that that's on your mind. I do see one now, but I'll finish and then I'll ask this question. I do want to invite you to our workshop, our next webinar, which will be in May. It's on May 8th. So you'll have a chance to sign up for that soon, and that one will be on choosing music for worship. And included in that will be a panel of all of our our endorsed worship coaches that we have, Joy being one of them. We have 10 worship coaches scattered throughout the U.S. and Canada, and I don't think we're going to be able to get all 10 on one webinar, but I think we're going to probably do 2 webinars with specific questions on how to choose music for worship. So it'll be very practical, and we will have lots of your engagement and questions in that. But let me ask you this, Joy. Michelle has asked, you mentioned a book called Connections. Oh, she would like to know again, who was the author on that?
Paul Stanley, Robert Clinton. They wrote it together, and I'm going to step out of the frame because it's sitting right here. Oh, it's on the floor. It's looking like this. This is one of the later editions. I was actually thinking, as I said this too, this book is, it's very helpful to understand different roles. And as I said, these guys have been the ones who have discipled people. So it's very spiritual in nature in thinking about developing spiritual leaders, church leaders, ministry leaders. It's also, if I may admit, it's older. It's more dated than some books. It may be the cleanest in terms of looking at the roles and separated, but it is older. If you're looking, and much of the context, I did try to cover that here today. If you're looking for something more recent and thinking in terms of what it means to work together as a team, the quote I gave you at the opening about passing the baton comes from the book Paul and His Team by Ryan Lockesmoe. And that book I highly recommend to you folks as inspiration. Ryan is a young, brilliant man pastoring a church plant in Texas, and just working in cooperative ministry with a number of people. And I had the privilege, he attended our congregation when he was working on his PhD here in Denver. So a personal relationship with him, but I have been so blessed and learned so much from Ryan. So that book I highly recommend to you. Another book that I found valuable, again, as I was re-looking through things, so this is multiple times I have used this book, and Diane, you'll recognize this one too, Shaped by God, 12 Essentials for Nurturing Faith in Children, Youth, and Adults. There's a number of good stories in here. So if you don't have this one, I'm assuming many of you do. It's been around a little while now, but very helpful in thinking creatively even about relationships and how to engage with people. Anything else?
Great. I don't see any more. So I'll give you just a few words to close. But first, Joy, let me say too, I was going to mention that you have mentioned a few things that have been very difficult in your community this last week. And we are worship people and pastors and leaders, and we will be praying for you and your Denver community as they walk through this dark place, and yet with hope. So our prayers and our love are with you. Thank you.
Thank you. And one of the pieces that just didn't seem to fit here is also to say, if we're going to be mentors, we are going to be drawn into the lives of other people. And for me, that is a holy ground to be invited into people's lives and help them walk the journey. And when their journeys get dark, we get to walk alongside. So 2 nights ago, when a young woman I mentored texted me to say that her husband of 36 years old had just had a stroke, I knew that that was an invitation from her to continue to walk with her, as we have done for a number of years already, in a totally different role of mentoring. It was more of a teaching and coaching role. That role is going to shift now. And I don't know what it's going to look like, but that invitation is a beautiful one. So yes, Diane, thank you for your prayers and your support. And I know that's how we do life. We do it together. Last time, I want to end today where I started last time. I said these words: humans are imitators. We tend to do life the way we have observed it along the way. We teach the way we were taught. We lead the way we were led. We mentor the way we were mentored. Our default is to imitate, unless we are intentional about doing things differently than they were done to us. We will simply mimic our history. That gives me pause and concern, because I'm not sure that many of us were mentored well in the past. I know that there were things in my past, and probably in yours. Teaching has changed. The ways in which we communicated things were done differently, and some was effective and some was not. But certainly the role of mentoring wasn't much talked about, wasn't much practiced. Maybe there's exceptions where it was done really, really well, and you want to imitate how you were mentored. But I think it is more likely that many of us need to acknowledge that unless we are intentional about doing things differently, how we pass on the news, the knowledge, the skills we have, if we don't do it differently, we're going to do the same things to other people that were done to us. And for some of us, that will mean nothing. We're just going to hope they catch it. We're going to go about it. We're just going to live our lives and hope that our children and the young people, or maybe it's even older people than us, will simply grasp, oh, yeah, that's how you do worship ministry, just by watching us. I'd like to suggest and hope that this time of looking and separating and parsing apart these roles is inspiring each one of us to say, oh, I could engage in that role in someone else's life much more intentionally, much more prayerfully, with much more hope for molding and shaping. And at the very same time, I want to end with this. We are not only to be mentors, but we are also to look for ways in which each one of these roles we might need to grow in. And perhaps we need to have a mentee-driven relationship with someone else where we ask someone, I would like to be mentored by you. Would you help me grow in this? So I hope that we took time to be here today. We took time to learn. Hope that we will continue to do that in the future. Thanks for giving me your time today.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and God bless you in your work and your worship. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Goodbye.